This is Pastor Tim coming to you from Bend and Lomita United Methodist Churches in Central Texas, small churches and small communities trying to do a big ministry. We have been talking about the Bible because we think it's important that people know the Bible, and there's been a lack of teaching and a lack of studying the Bible so that even the basic stories people don't know. I think that we need to remember the characters of the Bible, so we've been doing that. Today we have been doing the Hebrew Bible. Now we're going to switch to the newer testimony of Jesus, to the Greek Bible, so to speak. And we'll begin at the beginning. We'll talk about Mary and Joseph, Jesus' parents. Joseph was probably a carpenter. That's a broad term. It could also mean that he was a stonemason. It meant that he built things. He may have built furniture for inside the house. He may have built the stones together to make the house, or even the mud bricks that they used to use for some homes to frame them up, and there was a combination of things. He was in Nazareth. He probably worked in one of the nearby towns. There was a large town nearby, a Greek town, so he probably traveled there every day to work. He may have had his carpentry shop, but we don't know. There were small houses, so they may not have room for a carpentry shop in his house. But there was nothing particularly noteworthy about Joseph. It mentions that he was in the line of David, but so were thousands of people. Mary, he was betrothed to Mary. Betrothed meant that his parents and her parents had arranged the marriage. That seems strange to us, but it was just as natural as getting up in the morning and eating breakfast, because that's what you expected. Just like you probably did the work of your father, you followed, and your son would follow that line of work. So you just expected for your parents to make an arrangement. With the divorce rate, when we choose our own, I'm not sure if that's not a better way. Your parents might be able to pick out somebody better for you than what you can pick out yourself. There was also a feeling that you were going to stay married, that there was no divorce, so to speak. The Hebrew people had divorce was easy in some circles and hard in others, but it was considered that you would stay married because you had a short lifespan, and so there was no really reason to get divorced and to marry somebody else. Joseph was betrothed to Mary, and that meant that they were, in the eyes of the family and everything around the community, were considered married. They didn't sleep together. They didn't cohabitate, but they were as betrothed. If they wanted to end the betrothal, the engagement, they had to get a divorce. So they were stuck together. Now, in Luke's gospel, the angel comes to Mary. Mary didn't have anything special. She was probably 13, 14 years old, maybe even as young as 12. And Joseph was probably old enough to be making a living, so he might have been 16, 17, 18 years old. There's some traditions that say he was older than that, but it doesn't say anything about that in the scriptures. But the angel comes to Mary and says that you have found favor with God. And Mary is just amazed and said, let it be the handmaiden of the Lord. She submitted to that which would come upon her. She didn't have any particular characteristics. They didn't say she was especially religious or especially devout in her practices, that she was a very moral person. All we know is that she was young and just beginning adult life. And I think that probably the Gospel of Luke very often picks people that are the least likely, the ones who don't have anything to offer. Um, when Jesus said, "Let the children come to me," it was because not because they were innocent or specially devoted, but that they didn't have anything to offer. They didn't have anything to pay back. So Mary didn't have anything to pay back to God. Just her willingness to be the receptacle for what God was going to do. In Matthew, it talks about the angel came to Joseph. Joseph had been decided to, when she found that Mary was pregnant, he was going to divorce her quietly. If he wanted to, he could make a big scene about it. He could even go to the tribal elders, the leaders of the community, and the leaders of the synagogue, and she would have probably been stoned to death for infidelity. But he wanted to do it quietly and discreetly and out, so no one would try to cover it up, so no one would find out. But the angel says to him, "Go ahead and marry Mary, because it's okay. It's what God is doing." I can imagine that was a very troubled pregnancy. The trouble not just physically, but just that what was God doing? What was going to happen to us? Because everybody could count, and everyone knew how long they'd been married, and so they had a lot of community gossip to deal with. Then when the story is that in Luke that everyone went to their hometowns to be taxed, and so they went to Bethlehem. That must have been a very difficult trip when she was 9 months pregnant. And she stays in a manger, which was where the animals were. That may have been a separate room in the house. It may have been a barn. It may have been that the inn was a walled up cave that everyone slept together. So she couldn't be there with being pregnant. All the men would have to leave if she was to begin to give birth. And it may have been a lean-to outside. We just don't know. We just don't know if it looked like the cards, the Christmas cards that we have. But she delivered the baby and had quite a tumult. Later on, after the 8th day, they presented Jesus to the temple, where they were received by Simeon and Anna, who had been waiting their whole lives to see the Messiah, and they had finally seen that Messiah. By the way, they were going to make it was their first son, so they were going to make a gift, a sacrifice to the church, to the temple, because traditionally you gave your first child to the temple, and then you bought them back. Usually it was with a goat or a sheep, but they didn't have any money, so they had 2 doves that they offered to redeem Jesus. We find out that when he was 12 years old, that they went to Jerusalem. They probably went there every year, or maybe 2 or 3 times a year, as devoted parents of in a Jewish family. They went to worship, and then when they did, Jesus stayed behind, and there was a big group of people. The whole village probably went together. There were only 200 people in their village, so most of them probably traveled that could as a group to be safe on the road. And then Jesus stayed behind and talked to the elders and asked them questions and challenged their ideas and just amazed them. And so they had to go back and find them. It's interesting that Jesus said, Mary said basically, how did you do this to us? And he says, I must be about my Father's business. By the time we get to the beginning of the ministry, Joseph is gone. Probably if he was 18 years old when Jesus was born, then he was 30 when they took Jesus to the temple. And 30 was about the average age span of someone in that day and time. So he was actually kind of long in the tooth at 30. It's hard for us to imagine that, but that was the case. Probably Jesus picked up his carpentry skills and took over for his father until he began his ministry. And then we see various times mother's very supportive and comes to be around him even at his death. And John, the disciple John, Jesus assigns him the job of taking care of his mother after he's gone. So we don't know anything about what happened to her. It may have been that she went with John to Patmos. There's different traditions about whatever happened to Mary. But that's the story of Mary and Joseph, who were humble people who were not significant in the lives of the world. Nobody paid any much attention to them, and yet God uses them to do the most amazing thing in the history of the world. So that's Mary and Joseph. They're a lot like you and me. So I'll see you next time.